Widening social rifts define our era, driven by indignant anger and manipulation through engineered fear and division. To move forward and heal, we need secure men and strong women. But more importantly, we must learn how to listen to each other. As I asked women around me how I could help, I started to understand that the idea I once considered a conclusion was only the beginning.
Women want to be heard, but it's not enough yet. So don't just hear us, but hear us when we say that everything that's happening is not enough to treat us as fully valuable, fully worthy human beings, equal in every way to men.
A unified answer that branches out into infinite diversity, with one common factor. The people not listening tend to be men.
But women cannot make men listen, and certainly cannot integrate what they hear into understanding and action. Only men can do that for themselves.
So if men can't listen to women, LGBTQ+, minority groups, or other people with different perspectives, maybe they can listen to a man having a conversation with these people. I'm inviting you into my journey to become a better listener and meet some intriguing people along the way. Hello and welcome to the If Men Can't Listen To podcast, and absolutely the opposite of what I promised. I was going to try and do this once a week, but life happens sometimes and doesn't really wait its turn, so life had to be dealt with. And anyhow, I am going to be not promising to do this once a week. Anyhow, this week we have Heather, and Heather is someone I met through some local community organizing and also happens to know my wife, and my wife happens to know everybody, so that really doesn't limit it too much. So anyways, I'm going to let Heather introduce herself.
Well, hey, I'm super excited to be here, and thank you so much for interviewing me today for your podcast. My name is Heather Friedley. I am an artist and organizer here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I create oil paintings, and I'm a professional snow sculptor in the winter. So I do a variety of art.
Yeah, I was about to get to that. I'm like, I hope you don't leave that part out, because I actually saw your work a couple of years ago at the fairgrounds.
Oh, nice.
And and it was pretty cool. We didn't manage to run into you. I think you were out doing whatever. But Jessica pointed it out. Yeah, it was just really cool walking around all those snow sculptures. It's a lot more intricate than I assumed they would be.
Yeah, they're pretty intense. Here, give me one moment. My dogs are calling me, and they are sad to not be in this room. So let me go grab them.
Yes, and I've got a cat in this room too, so I totally understand. He's running around the floor someplace.
Come here.
Yeah, we're no stranger to animal show and tell on the If Men Can't Listen To podcast. At this point in time,
Lily.
Yes, very nice. Looks very, very intense. We'll have a cat around here at some point too, that at this point I might as well just credit as a co-host.
I love that. Well, our animals are definitely part of our personas, and very important to the well-being of our souls, I think.
Oh yeah, and just because I don't do anything easy, I suppose. I have two ferals, and they hate each other, but they're starting to be able to be in the same room together, so that's good.
Nice.
So anyways, getting back to the snow sculpture thing, like I'm curious, what got you into thinking that, was it a situation where like snowmen are just way too basic? Like what got you into snow sculpting?
Well, an interesting thing about me is that I grew up half my childhood in the Southwest where there was no snow. So as a kid, I used to just like pray for snow in the winter, and I'd watch all those Hallmark Christmas movies and be like, man, I really want it to snow like it does in those movies. And it never did. And so I moved to Michigan, the second part of my childhood, where suddenly I had all 4 seasons, which was amazing. And I ended up really enjoying playing in the snow. And so that's something that I've brought with me into my adulthood. When I was living up in Ely, Minnesota, this is many years later, one of my friends said, hey, you're artsy. I have a snow sculpting thing where you can come and sculpt snow with me at the park downtown Ely, Minnesota. And I really want you to be on my snow sculpting team. And I said, sure, that sounds fun. Let's do it. So ever since then, 15 years ago, I've been sculpting snow ever since.
So, like, What are the, like, is there, okay, so it's, I'm assuming you just don't go out there with a shovel and some mittens and sort it out. Like, how, I mean, like, explain, I'm fascinated by this. Can you explain, like, the process from, like, stem to stern here? Because I'm assuming there's got to be a lot of planning involved. How do you, like, I know with the sand castles and stuff, there's a special way you're supposed to wet the sand to, like, what's the, you don't have to give the full secret sauce on it, but, like, how, in general, do you get snow to behave in such a cohesive way?
That's a great question. So, as you may have experienced yourself, not all snow is the same. Sometimes snow is powdery and it falls apart, and sometimes snow sticks together really well. So, for us, the snow sculpting itself starts with a block of snow. It becomes almost like a block of ice. And in order to get that block of snow, you have a form, so usually a wooden form that's built into the shape of a block, and you haul a bunch of snow in there, put it in, stomp it down with your feet. So it's a very mechanical process. Let it sit for half an hour to a day. And then you pull off those sides and you have a block of snow that's compacted that is almost as hard as ice, but it's snow. So it still has that granular quality to it. And it's very sculptable. It's a lot of fun.
So, living in the Southwest, what brought you back to Minnesota full time? Well, I suppose you said you did Michigan first, but, like, what brought you up to the land of potential ice sculpture and snow sculpture?
So, the one thing that really brought me to Minnesota, which drives a lot of my art passion to this day, is the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And when I was in college, I took a trip in the Boundary Waters, and it was revolutionary for me. I was out there for a week, and when I got off trail, I was like, I need to get back to Minnesota. This is a magical, spiritual place and be out in the woods. And so when I was done with college, I spent some time teaching outdoor education. And then at a certain point, I signed up to guide canoe trips in the Boundary Waters. And so that's how I ended up in Ely for many years. That's where I met my husband and we started our family.
Very cool. And, you know, it's something that you just kind of have to experience. Like, once you get about halfway up the state, it goes from, you know, your typical flat land and with the, you know, occasional elevation change of maybe, I don't know, 20 feet,
Mm-hmm.
you know, really nothing drastic, to some really beautiful woodlands. And the further north you get up into, like, the Duluth area and even more north of that, and then you go up in the middle of the state, you know, to the Iron Range and all that other stuff, it is quite spectacular. And I don't think people think of that when they think of Minnesota all that much.
No, I mean, it is such a dramatic shift going through all those different ecosystems because Minnesota has got like 5 or 6 different ecosystems. And as you go north, you can feel the change. You leave the cities and it's a different ecosystem. You go a little farther north, you got, you know, your birch trees and poplars. You go even farther north and you start seeing those pines come in, the majestic whites and red pines. And suddenly you're in the Boundary Waters. And that's just, that Canadian shield rock just really speaks to me. So.
Very cool. I really want to go up there at some point. I got to admit, I'm a failure as a Minnesotan. I have never been to the Boundary Waters.
What?
I have not.
Cray.
I have not. We want to go up to that little notch on top of the state at some point, and I feel like maybe that's the time we take the kayaks up there.
That would be a good idea.
I built a trailer for 4 kayaks, but we can also probably put our huge canoe on it or on top of the car. And yeah, I would like to do that at some point.
Yeah, you got to get out there, Shane. That's so important as a Minnesotan, I got to tell you.
Mm-hmm. So what came first, the painting or the snow sculpting?
Well, I've been an artist my whole life. I mean, even when I was a little kid, I was coloring and painting and entering art competitions and things like that. So I got to say, art came first. The painting came first, but you know, snow sculpting, being in the land of 10,000 lakes and everlong winter, I mean, that's been a very close second. It's in length, you know.
So we connected through activism, and I'm kind of curious here, what brought you into activism, and is it just a larger sense of empathy and perception that maybe comes from a place of artistic talent and artistic journey?
Yeah, I also feel like for me, just like my art journey, my activism journey started when I was young. So my family took me to my first protest, which happened to be the Million Mom March in DC back in the late 90s, I believe, maybe early 2000s. And ever since then, they've always encouraged me to be an engaged citizen, an informed citizen, and I will always speak up when I think when I see injustice happening in the world, and especially in the United States. Our family on my mother's side is indigenous, and so for us, living is political. Just being alive, existing, being a part of a tribe, sovereignty, things like that. But especially now, though, and being in this particularly fascist political climate, the tyranny of the government over the people. As indigenous people, we've seen this before because it happened to our people and it continues to happen. So it's not new, but we want to make sure that it doesn't spread. And so you'll see a lot of indigenous activists out there as well. And I think that's the crux of where I get the motivation.
And I got to imagine, and I'm not indigenous myself, but I've got a sense of empathy and I try and care about these things. If you really want to pull back to a micro level, like instead of like trying to envision this whole huge system, imagine, and this is, I'm not trying to explain this to you. I'm just maybe bringing this out to whoever's listening, because you know about this more than I do. And I suppose this is a statement wrapped up in a question. But it feels like if a squatter showed up at your house, kicked you out or made you live in the garage, or decided they wanted the garage and then they made you live in the outhouse and all this other stuff, and then decided, and it's like you're watching from what used to be your house, these people then violently mistreating anybody who comes near the house and like trying to say that they have a right. Not only do they not have a right to, come into the house in the first place and kick you out, but then now they're claiming they have this domain over something that wasn't theirs in the first place. And it's not just cringeworthy. It's it's bullshit.
Yeah.
So like, could you, and this is where I have to both acknowledge and respect the emotional labor that goes into this kind of ask. Could you maybe expand on how, as an indigenous person, you view all of this idea that, there's a thing going on in Los Angeles right now where they're trying, this is land that they took from Mexico. And I used to live in California. I'm very, very aware of this. This is land they took from Mexico, and the people who were there were suddenly overnight changed into being residents of the United States, at least. And now they're trying to say that these people who were there first can't technically be there anymore, to the point where they're being spirited away to shadow prisons without due process. And just because, you don't have papers on you, I mean, hell, what would happen if you forget your driver's license one day? And I just kind of want to hear how, I just said, hey, I want you to talk about it. And then I talked for 5 minutes straight. So my apologies. I just want to hear your thoughts on that whole thing.
Yeah. There's a saying in our community that is, nobody is illegal on stolen land. And, the land was taken from the indigenous people, oftentimes violently and forcefully. And, our relatives from Mexico and South America, they're all indigenous to these lands. Our people traveled all the way north to the Arctic Circle, all the way down to the tip of Chile before it was those things. And we say, what the fuck? Because, they're going in and they're trying to eradicate people that have brown skin, essentially, right? Because we're just talking about, these people are white nationalists that are going in, and that this is the whole administration. And so I think, just like the genocide going on out in Palestine, it's very similar to the genocide that happened to our people. And so this is a continuation of that fight and that struggle, even if people don't realize it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing. People think like, oh, they're Mexicans. They're like their own unique. No, they're
largely indigenous.
Right. So for example, sorry. So for example, like on my father's side of the family, they're from Huatabampo, Mexico. I don't know that side of the family very well, but I know that my grandmother on that side, she was indigenous. And the reason she came to the United States, she was literally, like, at least what I have been told, was a mail order bride seeking, the freedoms that the United States supposedly offers, right? And so she married someone she never really knew, moved to Los Angeles. This is like part of the quote unquote American dream for a lot of people, because they're in these situations that are really rough and they choose to come here because of the promise of the American dream. And so, intrinsically, I'm tied with that struggle as well, of the people coming north to Los Angeles where I was born.
Yeah, and this is before. I think there's a little bit of a lag, so I apologize for the speaking over you there for a moment.
That's okay.
The interesting part to me is that they think because these people speak a language of one colonizer, that it makes them different from the other indigenous people that speak the languages of their tribe. But they don't realize there is no larger Mexico per se. It's a
Right.
colonized area, and they've got their own nations down there, with different languages and everything that was unified into Mexico. So
Right.
we're dealing with so many layers of colonization that it's like it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it, I feel.
Right. And people, as people in bodies, we're kind of geared with our amygdalas to respond, right? And some people choose to respond to brown bodies or indigenous existences with rejection, because that challenges their own colonial existence as the settlers within this land. And so um, that is a thing that, people struggle with inside themselves.
I can feel like I can expand on that too. This whole thing is so many layers of complexity, and it's this giant machine. It's meant to harvest the resources of the people that actually do the work.
That's right.
And I'm like inches away from a hammer and sickle by saying this, but it is what it is. When that system exists, you have to be operating almost like a pyramid scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to make people feel good about being in the pyramid scheme is convince them that they are not the bottom of that pyramid.
That's right.
And you do that by creating these subclasses, these subhumans that they don't deserve this as much as you do per se. And it's all bullshit. It's just meant to be a distraction from the fact that you're a lot closer to the bottom of the pyramid than you are to the top, but they don't want you to feel disenfranchised. So they've created
Absolutely.
these systems where these other people now are the bottom, and you are lord and master over these people on the bottom, when in reality you're just more of the crop.
That's right. And honestly, another way to frame this whole struggle is it's a class war. It's a class war. So
Yes.
it's like, the billionaire class and the people that have the power, or some semblance of an authoritarian idea of power, they try to pit us against each other down. They view us as other, they view us as lesser, and they try to pit us against each other, right? So that's why we see sometimes some infighting between people you think wouldn't be fighting. A lot of that is caused by just disinformation and misinformation sown by these radical groups and billionaires in order to keep the people down.
Yeah, and it's all just it's even distraction. Like, oh, we'll promise you a higher rung on this ladder, and it's like they don't show you the top of the pyramid because it's just so damn far.
Right. And there's almost 0% chance that you're gonna go from the bottom to the top of the pyramid.
Right. Like even generations later, you're not likely to. I mean, the whole idea, like, we should never have generational poverty if we have a working system. If
Absolutely.
the system is, they say on its face, the system is the land of opportunity. You can work hard, get anywhere, right? If you're just willing to put in enough work. But, That's not the actual system. You got to know somebody. You got to have generational wealth behind you. You don't wind up a billionaire on your own, no matter how hard, people try and rewrite the narrative once they're there.
Right. And honestly, nobody should be a billionaire, because the billionaire class is only formed on the backs of those that are the laborers that they put down underneath them. And if it wasn't for the workers, they wouldn't be where they are. And oftentimes they have this delusion that they got there on their own, pulled themselves up by whatever imaginary bootstraps they think they got going on, when that is just absolutely, for the most part, not the case.
Well, I mean, come on. Doesn't everyone's daddy have an emerald mine?
Ha! Yeah, right?
That's just that. I mean, anyone with an emerald mine can do anything they want to do in life. And why can't everyone do that?
Yeah, that's some complete bullshit. But, that's why we keep fighting. And that's why there's still that struggle. And that's why we're here where we are today.
So the activism organization that we ended up meeting through is 5051. And I've given my origin story a few times. I don't know if you've heard it. We're basically...
I haven't.
Okay, so I'll do it again. And sucks to be everyone else who's listening to this. So basically... I was a person interested in human rights since I was a teenager, just in terms of I wanted to be a good person. That's how I was raised. I was raised to do the right thing, leave the world in a better place than I found it. I became a feminist when my children were born assigned female at birth. I became a militant feminist right at the exact moment I heard that one smug asshole. What's his name? I don't even care. He's not even there's so many people here that I've tried to reference, and I was like, these people don't deserve the dignity of me knowing their name. But it was that guy that was like, your body, my choice.
Oh yeah, that asshole.
And then there was, it created a ripple effect of people thinking this is the fun thing to say now. And I was ready to go give some of those people free flight lessons with some free dental work.
Mm-hmm.
And when I showed up into these spaces trying to figure out what I wanted to do, resoundingly, the answer was don't do that. And it was through the creation of this project that I ended up navigating through a lot of feminist spaces. And a lot of the people who are organizers in those in the activist space, that are currently involved in trying to save this country, if that's my opinion, but I feel like that's fact, are women. And there's a huge overlap between the feminist space and the resistance space.
There absolutely is. I would say about 75% of the activists that I've met are women.
Yeah, and I think that's a lower number than it should be, at least in leadership, but I think men need to start showing up for this. And to an extent they are. But the thing is that of all the ideas I've heard a lot of men say to keep trying the same thing we've always done. We need to restore the system back to what it was. But I feel like the people who are going to plan our way out of this are going to be women. We have as men had many thousands of years to figure out a way to make the right society. And if you look around you, we have not been doing a great job of that. I think it's time for some different ideas. And instead of, I could go really on a tangent on this, and I'm not, because I feel like I'm even challenging myself on some of those notions about how in history things that have been led by men have been violent. But then you think about it, some of the most badass warriors in history have been women. And so I stopped myself on that one. I went, oh, you know what? Never mind. That's not really fair. There was that, I wish I would remember her name. There was it was in ancient China, and she had this huge navy and was one of the most badass warriors. And I can't really say, oh, women are all about, that's, you know what? That's a blind spot that I have to own. That's not necessarily true.
It is a complicated history, isn't it?
Yes, women can throw down with the best of them, I think. But the point is, I feel like they're not as insecurity driven. I think is the more accurate way to say it. They're not going to do rash things out of insecurity like men do. And I feel like men have evolved to be tremendously insecure, at least as in order to operate and get ahead in the society we're in.
I do hear a lot of those insecurities. I feel like, you have a lot of men talking about, you know, bulking up or having a perfect jawline or, like, oh, I could get with so many women or things like that, right? So like these are all projections of that insecurity, which, there is such thing as toxic masculinity, right? And so and that kind of culture not only hurts women, but it hurts men too, and people don't realize that.
Like, what do you feel about this thought? And because we are kind of recently connected, you probably haven't heard me say this. I feel that toxic masculinity is the byproduct of competitive masculinity. What do you think about that? Like, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, reflecting upon it in this moment, I would say that sounds fairly accurate, honestly. Um, I personally, I'm a very competitive person myself when it comes to my art and the things I do. And oftentimes, I tend to portray myself, I think, in a more masculine way than a lot of women do because of that competitive edge. I feel that maybe there's some social conditioning with men, though, where that competitive edge, which can be a good thing, right? Because we want to make sure that we're achieving our best, gets turned into something that is a bad thing, maybe self hurt, men hurting themselves, men hurting others physically, mentally, emotionally.
So this brings a secondary thought for me. A little bit of, I'll show you my emotional state and you show me yours regarding competitiveness. This is an I feel statement. And I'm certainly, it's not everybody, but I feel it's a fair generalization. The competitiveness in men is based on the idea that you must be the best of something in order to have worth. And the problem is that if you are to obtain being the best at something, there are very few moments in history where somebody was able to stay the best at something for more than a very short amount of time. So it creates this carrot on a stick that you'll never actually reach. And I feel that is the nature, the core of competitiveness in men. You've got this unreachable goal and you are going to sacrifice everything to get it. And I'm wondering how that competitiveness manifests in you and maybe the other women that you've seen.
That's a great question. So a little bit more about me and my snow sculpting background. I have competed in a lot of different formats, and one of the things that is probably like the crowning achievement of my life is with my team that I was with, Team Dino Fight. We won the U.S. National Snow Sculpting Competition back in 2019 with a piece called "Arise from the Storm," which is about a lot of these tumultuous and emotional states we find ourselves in, represented through a heron that's rising up from turbulent waters. And so after that moment, which was so incredible and like I couldn't believe it, but then I was like, overwhelmed and stuff, I found it really hard in a lot of ways to be like, what's next? Like, I reached the top at the time. That was before we even had a world competition of snow sculpting. Now what, right? And so I think it can affect women that way too. But what I have done with that energy, now that I'm like, okay, I don't have to be at the top all the time, is I've kind of turned my artistic view with snow sculpting to reflect more of our family's like cultural heritage, being Anishinaabe. My current team is called Team Quay. We are 3 indigenous women. We're all with Anishinaabe roots. And my sister's on the team, and Maggie Thompson is also on the team. And we've been doing a lot of cultural expression. And so instead of, while we're still competitive and we enjoy competing, we really want to make sure we're expressing our cultural heritage and getting the word out about certain issues. Like, we did a piece about pollinators this year, which is an incredibly important issue because we have such a decline in the pollinator population. And the natural world is a very important thing for all of us in that group. So the other way I've kind of turned that around and like been like, okay, I've been to the top, now what? Is I've done a lot of teaching. So I'm trying to bring in new people into the snow sculpting field. I've definitely trained up a couple new people and dispersed them to other teams. And I think that also keeps the culture alive instead of getting stifled by the same old people all of the time. And I've really enjoyed seeing more and more artists come into the snow sculpting field as a legitimate art form. I also, in my competition life, I was able to partake in a Disney show, which was their first ever competitive kind of reality snow sculpting TV show called Best in Snow. And I got to work with a team of really incredible pumpkin carvers and one chainsaw carver on my team. And I got to work with Titus Burgess and Kermit the Frog. So like that was like my next thing that I did. That was so cool.
Now I'm extremely jealous. The Kermit the Frog thing, that right there, that is how you know you've made it in life. You are nothing as an artist.
Achievement.
Yeah, you are nothing as an artist until you have done something with a Muppet. It's just the facts. It's just that I don't make the rules. That's just the rules. So
it was really cool. You know what? Here's the thing too. I gotta tell you, I didn't realize how much it would affect me emotionally to be on the same set as Kermit the Frog. Like, I grew up with PBS. I wasn't like especially attached to the Muppets or anything, but Kermit the Frog, man, he's real. Like when he was on set, I started crying. Like my body had this visceral reaction that was full of love for Kermit the Frog. Like I had to hide behind my snow sculpture a little bit and like regain my composure when Kermit came out. And then I got to meet him like in person, and it was like the coolest thing. And you think, okay. So like when you're on a set, you obviously can see the puppet master still, right? I'm like, they're right there. They have their arm up, the puppet, but they don't exist. I don't, they're magic. You all you see is Kermit the Frog. You don't see that guy. You know what I mean?
I've heard this over and over again that the puppeteer essentially disappears and you don't even notice them. You like start talking to the puppet, and that's like, you probably handled that a million times better than I would. I probably just would have like had to take like 5 minutes to just sob.
I think I did take like 5 minutes to sob. Like, I'm just glad they didn't catch me on camera behind the snow sculpture, because since it was reality TV, they had cameras everywhere. Yeah.
It's like, oh, why is your face all wet? Oh, I must have got some snow. But I would just be like, I stood in the same room. I took the Stax music tour, and I stood in the same room. I don't have a favorite song, but I have one this is something I won't get into too much, because I spent a whole lot of time on my episode with Eve nerding out about music. So I'll give you the short version.
All right.
I stood in the same room as the piano that Booker T used to record Green Onions.
Oh, cool.
And I didn't think it was going to affect me, but I started reading the little card that says what it was, and I started like choking up. I can't imagine if I was in the same room as Kermit the Frog, like the emotional drop I would have. Like it would just, the expression of emotions, I think, would not be my shining moment in life, but I think it would just have to happen because it's Kermit the Frog. Like you gotta.
Yeah, and it was like across the board. I don't think anybody who met him that day could really contain that emotion. It was really powerful.
I wonder how used to it they are, though. Like there's like, okay, here it comes.
Maybe. I don't know.
It's like
That's a good question.
Suddenly I'm 45, and suddenly I would be a 5-year-old. Like it would be an instant time machine. 40 years gone, I would just be a little kid again. That's
how I felt. Seriously. It was like there was this part of me that was still in there as a child that really just came to the surface. And I don't think I'll ever beat that experience, honest to God.
I'm envious. I'm literally like, I have to think about what we were talking about, because you're like, yeah, I met Kermit the Frog, and you're like, you just dropped the biggest possible name. You could have been like, yeah, I met Jesus Christ yesterday, and I'm like, yeah, but you met Kermit. That's like, seriously, you met Kermit the Frog. Like, what? why are we wasting time on this other thing? Like, tell me more about Kermit.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
So
no, it was amazing. That's for sure.
I'm going to go back. I made a note for myself on this one. Was a snow sculpture about pollinators and essentially a symbol of spring an intentional link?
No. I I wasn't thinking about spring. When I'm in winter mode, my brain is winter, winter, winter. I don't want winter to end when I'm wintering. Like, I don't know, this Los Angeles girl, like something about that magical snow moment, like when all those Hallmark movies growing up. You know, when I was a kid, okay, so when I was at school, elementary school, I remember one time being out playing recess and looking across the street and they're filming a Christmas snow scene. And it's like 80 fucking degrees outside. They're filming a Christmas snow scene where there's just carpeted with fake snow and they've got snow coming down. Cause like, you know, a lot of filming happens just like around Los Angeles. And, you know, that was so magical. So like, I feel like for me, I'm not thinking about spring, but I might be thinking about the plight of our pollinators and the fact that I was just taking a walk today, honestly, and I started getting choked up because I was walking through a little field of clover. And when I was a kid in Los Angeles at our school, if there was clover or dandelions, there was bees buzzing everywhere. But when I looked down at this field of clover that was at the local school, I saw nothing. It was a dead zone. There was no bees, no insects, no butterflies, silence. It was like silent spring out there. And I started getting really upset. I took a picture and I made a post about it. But then of course, as soon as I posted it, I looked down at my little dog that's over here and she started barking and running off. And then I noticed a bee and I was like, all right, there's one bee. There's still hope.
I've purposely let wildflowers grow in my yard, and I do the no mow May thing, and it's nice. Like my lawn will turn purple, but it took that level of letting the wildflowers grow, and it took years for the bees to come back.
And I do a lot of like native pollinator plantings at my house. I had a Lawns to Legumes grant last year or maybe 2 years ago that I planted a whole bunch of pollinator plants. And so in our yard, I've noticed that the insects are back to a certain extent, definitely not at levels that I had seen as a child. But the other thing we've noticed in our neighborhood is because I did that planting with a bunch of native plants, and then my neighbors around me have native plants, that come June, July, we actually at night have fireflies in our inner city neighborhood. Isn't that beautiful? We have fireflies.
So I live in the suburbs, and I've seen like one in the entire time I've lived here, and it was just some random thing, and it was like, oh wait, we have fireflies now. No, we had firefly.
No, we had them all summer last summer.
Oh, that's so nice.
The neighbors and I were talking about how we think we're making a difference, even no matter how small, which is how I approach activism too. You know, every little bit counts.
Right. And if everyone does a little bit, if we all push an inch, we're moving at miles at that point.
That's right.
So, kind of rewinding again, because there was something I was going to say. Oh, yeah. And this is maybe going to go in the podcast, maybe not. I had a bit of a teachable moment where I wrote something about wildflowers. Every now and again I get a poetic random tangent urge, so I feel moved. And I was sitting in the backyard, and my kid he's weird. I don't talk about kids much. I'm not going to get into it too much, but he found something in the backyard he wanted to dig up, and it was like, okay, cool. So I'm hanging out with him for a little bit. He's just really interested in nature. I'm hanging out with him a little bit, and it's at dusk, and I took this picture of this random wildflower growing up through the grass, and I started feeling compelled, and I just sat there and I wrote. And it's a poem about wildflowers that is 100% not about wildflowers. It's about homogenization and replacement and displacement and things like that. And I'll send it to you after this and see if you think it's worth releasing or not. I think it's good, but I think it might be slightly insensitive and taken the wrong way. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on it as a person with displaced ancestors.
Yeah, totally. I would love to take a look at that. And, you know, that made me think about how, for me, I've been doing outdoor education and other outdoor things for a long time. And I used to lead a program called Lands for Learning, which we would go out with kids and actually remove invasive species and replace with native species plants. And I do that still to this day, no matter how small the plot of land, just like I'm re-indigenizing my space in my yard. And so as an indigenous person to this country, I feel like that's a little bit of putting the indigenous people back into our landscape around us everywhere.
Yes, the symbolism of it. It's just like the boring fields of perfectly destroyed. Like you're not even letting this grass grow. You're destroying it before it can even seed. And
Right.
You're trying to tell me that that's better than a field of wildflowers?
Right. It's definitely a it's a lot of it is a colonial mindset of this replacement and dominion over the land, manifest destiny, all those
Yes.
things that came with it. And you can really see that reflected in the manicured lawns, especially we had like in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I'm just so glad though that things are shifting where natural spaces are becoming much more prevalent, and there's a lot of great ways to do them in ways that the everyday person can say, this is an organized natural space, right? Because sometimes it's aesthetics, right? So people like the manicured lawn because they see it and they can understand it, where a natural space that's indigenized with all the different plants and flowers, it's a little chaotic, and I think people really want to categorize that really hard.
I spent my summers up in a town. I'd say the easiest way to identify it is about halfway between Walker and Brainerd. And this is a town of 200 people. And, my grandparents had this plot of land on a lake, and it had a hill, and my grandma had these terraced flower beds and everything, but that was the organized part of it. The rest of it just grew wild. And that, my attachment to things that most people would consider disorganized and wild is that I don't get the same feeling of connection and calm from essentially putting carpet out in your front lawn that I do when things are allowed to flourish.
Yeah, me neither. I'm with you.
And I feel like this is the same generation that put carpet over so many beautiful hardwood floors. They did the same thing. They just put carpet on the outside that they had to fertilize and water.
Totally, yeah. And I'm just so glad that my house has hardwood floors. And we could choose to put a carpet on it, but we don't. And that's carpets growing up was pretty nasty. I always thought.
Right, like what's the point? Here's a sponge that will collect grit. It's like, what? No, ew. Can I just have something I can wipe off? Like, coincidentally, my cats will find any spot in this house whatsoever except for the easy-to-wipe hardwood floors to throw up on. They will go downstairs where there's carpet on the floor, or he will just go, like our big one, the one you saw just a few, 20 minutes ago, kind of come up here and hang out with me for a minute. He'll go to the first step and throw up on the step, the first place he can find carpet.
Amazing.
And it's like, are you...
I mean, that's part of the reason we don't have carpet too. I just gotta admit, because we got dogs and a cat, and oh my god! But and children. I've got boys.
Oh yes.
And it's a little bit insane around here.
Yes, children are a challenge in cleanliness. That is for sure. Mm-hmm. So the tangents are the lifeblood of this podcast, and I'm trying to backtrack down this tangent to figure out where we even started talking about this. And I think we were talking about meeting through 5051.
That's right.
We came from different angles on it. I got brought in as part of a creator pool, and then kind of went backwards and thought maybe, hey, I'd really like to, meet the local people.
Right.
Because we had some of these huge events, and it was really hard to stop someone in the middle of one of those events and be like, hey, by the way, do you have time to socialize? And it's like, hell no, we've got so much stuff going on that I didn't even bother. So I connected with you guys online, and ended up, small world, realizing that you and my wife knew each other. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so what got you specifically into 5051?
Well, after snow sculpting season, in which I spend pretty much 24/7 for 4 or 5 weeks outside in the cold, and really very hyper focused on creating giant masterpieces out of snow, I got slammed back into the real world. And this was early to mid-February, where I came back from the national competition. And I was like, okay, I don't have anything else on my schedule. And usually at this point, I just go straight into painting because that's the next season. I have painting season and I have snow sculpting season. And when I paint, I oftentimes will listen to podcasts or like maybe NPR or like whatever. And pretty much immediately on my ride home from nationals, I was listening to NPR and I was like, what the fuck is going on in our country? Like, I've been in La La Land, which has been great, but like I got slammed by all that news about what the Trump regime had been doing, that has been following like pretty much to a T Project 2025, and the rights that had been really getting infringed upon, and Doge and Elon Musk and all that stuff. And I was like, holy shit, what am I gonna do? And I had a friend that sent me a message. It was like, hey, did you hear there's a protest coming up? And this was like literally the week I came back. And I was like, no, but who is this group? I've never heard of them before. And she's like, I don't know, but that there's a protest and maybe we should go. So I was like, okay. And then I started looking online about 5051. And like, at first I was talking with a lot of my activist friends and they were like, we don't know this group. We're really sketched out by it. There's a lot going on right now. We try not to do things without the verified groups. And the fact that they're just starting out like and popped into the scene is like really sus. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just do a reconnaissance kind of thing and just go and look and kind of feel it out. So I went to the first protest and it was totally fine. It was great, actually. There was a lot of good speakers. There was good vibes. There wasn't any negative energy. And those were things I was looking for as having been a part of protests in the past, especially like during Black Lives Matter or, things like that, where things sometimes did go south. And I felt none of those vibes. So I was like, okay. So I reported back to some of my people like, hey, they seem legit. Like they're kind of new, but like, and then I saw another protest by 5051 was coming up. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to this one too. And when I went there, I brought my kid and he's really into doing like news programming and interviews. And so he interviewed Zach and some other people and we asked a bunch of questions. And then that night on my Facebook feed popped, hey, you might be interested in this group. And it was like Minnesota 5051. And I was like, cool. And I entered this Facebook group and I was the third person there. Like, I was like, damn, Facebook, the algorithm is listening.
Oh, that's a whole other thing. Like usually when
yeah.
I'm talking about anything in specifics, I unplug all of my Amazon devices.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't have any Amazon devices, so I'm kind of living in the Stone Age over here. But Facebook was listening that day, and I was like, oh my God. But I reached out to the person who was running the page, and I said, hey, do you need help? And I've run a couple pages before, and she's like, yeah. So that's kind of how I got involved, and I went in through this kind of back channel that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that appealed to me about the whole thing is that it's not about any one given person, and they actually take lots of steps to make sure it never does become about any one person. It's just mostly a bunch of people. The idea is to unify and have collective size and collective strength, but it's not under one direction. It's just
right.
Just a bunch of people that want to make a difference. And that really appealed to me because there's so many of these things that turn into cult of personality type things.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an instant. I'm just thinking, okay, well, that's there's a Who song about it, like Don't Get Fooled Again. And they were talking about, this is the same as the last guy. It doesn't matter,
Right.
I got to think about it because I think I'm mixing two songs together. But the idea is, what's the difference between this thing? It all reminds me of Animal Farm, like the current system we have now. Like as soon as you realize that you can coast on the work of other people and harness the work of other people, suddenly some animals become more equal than others. And I just feel like that's a cycle that keeps repeating. And we need to, I'm not saying that, the free market is inherently evil. I just think the way we go about it is inherently evil because it really encourages people to pull the ladder on the way up,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that, like you said, that is really cool about 5051 is that it's a decentralized movement, just like you're talking about. There's no one specific leader. everybody can take part. This is really a movement of the people, by the people, for the people. And that is really radical and cool.
Yep. Yeah. So I just hope it keeps staying that way, honestly, because it's it really is, it feels different. And here we are, we're like, cheerleading 50-51, but that's really not super wide. We just kind of, again, tangents are the lifeblood of this podcast. I know we wanted to talk about what's coming up. So the event that's coming up here on June 14th is the No Kings Day. It's really standing up against this power grab that has tried to centralize government in the executive branch. And this is something that surprises me, that more people on the right aren't screaming right now with pitchforks and torches in hand about, because this really comes down to the erosion of personal liberty. And I'm neither left nor right. I'm just an empathetic person who cares and has strong opinions about making the world a better place. And this really hits me on a personal liberties level. I really think that the idea of forcing people to be homogenous, forcing people to live a certain way is literally the reason why this country was formed, in rebellion at that idea. They didn't want to be told what religion. They didn't want to be told they had to suddenly give up. At first, it was what would be unilaterally and under one lump be called witches or witchcraft or heretic. All of the tribal stuff pre-Christendom in Europe would suddenly find itself labeled as a threat, a menace. And, and then the Catholics were given the boot by a guy who just wanted to get married 8 times or whatever it was. And, they kind of got tired of that, and rightfully so. And when they made this nation, it was about, hey, we really don't feel like you should be telling us what to do on this level.
Right.
And here we are, people are waving the flag that was generated in the blood of rebellion over following an authoritarian consolidation of power, and the don't tell me what to do. I want all of these people to take the damn don't tread on me flag down at this point, because you know what? They're laying on the ground and they're basically pointing and saying, please tread here.
Right.
This is not a partisan thing, I don't think. This is time to throw the goddamn tea in the harbor.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, I'm with you. I am also shocked that all these people that are like, oh, personal liberties for so long can't see the forest through the trees.
Right.
Okay, so another gem, I guess, or some more tea about me. I thru hiked the Appalachian Trail back in 2010. And so
okay.
I hiked from 2,178 miles from Georgia all the way up to Mount Katahdin in Maine. And one of the things that I felt like was a lesson that I took, and this is 2010, mind you, was, first of all, I never felt so free as a human, as a woman, than I did on the trail. I felt free to be myself. I felt freedom of being able to do this long walk. I felt really empowered by it. And I met lots and lots of local people, south to north, and people took care of you as a hiker. There was kind folks everywhere. And I feel like one of the things I'm sad about right now is just thinking about the division in our country, and the fact that I worry that those freedoms, I see them actively being taken away. And having touched freedom so boldly like I did when I was through hiking the Appalachian Trail, it really stuck in my soul. I am very concerned about where we're going, as someone who is just, I feel like I've seen God basically through the freedom that was afforded to me here in America.
And, really, like, this whole idea of the libertarians and all this stuff, like, I really feel like Ron Swanson would be at one of these protests with us. I think this should be a moment where the personal liberties folks and the far left folks would have that moment from like Step Brothers. It's like, did we just become best friends? You know,
Right?
it's like, why is there still a division? I mean, I know the answer to that, but like that's a whole other discussion. But like, this should really be pulling the shades, pulling the drapes back and opening up the window and showing just how much this is all about the erosion of personal liberty.
Right. And it's scary too. You know, I felt like we had made some real good progress towards personal liberties in the early mid 2000s, but here we are, and they're just like, I think it's the backlash of people receiving these freedoms that they were afforded in the Constitution and actually like having the laws back them up about it. And this is the backlash, right? This is the angry white Christian male backlash, the patriarchy, all the things being thrown at us as women, as people of color, as, you know, people that value our freedom. And it's the scary world out there. And I wonder, just like you do, what is going on in the minds of these people that had been shouting about their freedoms and liberties this whole time? They're so quiet now, or they just want to be treaded on. And that's so weird. But I think, you know, if we look at it through the lens of the culture we're swimming in, they've been fed a lot of mis and disinformation and purposeful lies through their media diet and through social media and, you know, all the things that I think fed into their biases that were already there. I mean, we're in the United States of America, so, you know, we have racial prejudices and we have, you know, class prejudice, and those things fed into the narrative, right? That they were feeling inside themselves a little bit, but this kept going until they, you know, they turned on their own other ideas for this other narrative that they bought.
Well, it's that feeling that they're slipping further down that pyramid, and that pyramid scheme thing that we talked about. It's like, oh no, so if they get the same rights or privilege that I get, does this mean I am, because it's this false narrative of a zero-sum competition.
Right.
Oh, I just got shoved further down the pyramid, and that's like somebody cutting in line, and I don't like that. But it's like, no, it just means that we're rewriting the pyramid a little bit.
Right, exactly. And, you know, I go back to your thoughts on competition, and, you know, when you're on the top, it's great. But then like when you're sliding down, it can be scary, but you have to just redefine for yourself. What does it mean? What does this American dream mean to you when you're not in the position of power?
And, you know, do you want the privilege that's coded in other people's blood?
Right, exactly.
I don't. And, you know, I've got it. It's a default. And I made the resolution to use that point of privilege to try and reject that privilege, to try and distribute that privilege to other people that should have it, not because I'm taking it away from myself, but I am removing the barriers.
That's right. And like, to a certain extent, I try to do that same thing through my other practice, which is I have a small art gallery. And so I try to bring in artists that are less represented in the art world, especially like emerging artists or BIPOC artists or LGBTQ artists. And I just like, I think it's important that we spread that love. And when we have a position of power, that we share that power with each other to lift each other up.
So there's a James Baldwin quote that I'm just going to patch in here that I feel covers this. And it was along the lines of, I don't need you to do anything for me. I need you to stop, or I need you to remove the barriers that don't allow me to do it myself.
But obviously you knew, every white man knows, that he would not himself, lying track for nothing. He would not himself allow his child to be sold from him as though the child were a mule. He would not himself allow himself not to have the autonomy of his own house and his own woman. He would not himself pick all that cotton and carry it to market just because he loved white people. We all know that. And the word Negro in this country really is designed finally to disguise the fact that when it's talking about another man, a man like you, who wants what you want. And insofar as the American Republic wants to think there has been progress, they overlook one very simple thing. I don't want to be given anything by you. I just want you to leave me alone so I can do it myself. And it also overlooks another very important thing. Perhaps I don't think that this republic is the summit of human civilization. Perhaps I don't want to become like Ronald Reagan, or like the president of General Motors. Perhaps I have another sense of life, which in fact my situation here has forced me to trust. And perhaps I know more about you and your institutions than you know about me. And perhaps I have a judgment on them. Perhaps I don't want what you think I want. And if there's nothing you can give me, perhaps there is something that I can give you.
And I feel like that describes this privilege situation. It's not that people have an elevated level of privilege. It's that the appropriate amount of privilege has been held back from everyone to a certain degree.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful idea and quote. And I definitely support, spreading the love, right?
Well, yeah. And why wouldn't you want someone, if the calling, the motto has been, well, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all this other stuff, and this is the land of opportunity, you should be able to do this. Why wouldn't you want everyone to have the same opportunity you do? And I think
because that's the spices, that gives flavor and life to everything that you're doing. Like the fact that, there's a Mexican restaurant that's successful and tasty, that's a good thing, right? Or like, people being smart and finding a new technology that's good for everyone, or a medicine, like that's a good thing. Those are benefits in the society that we have with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also why No Kings on the 14th is really important to me, is because it's really showing a group solidarity with each other. We all gather together to represent lots of different flavors and lots of different experiences, to say we value our freedoms here in the United States of America that are afforded to us in the Constitution. And we value having a democracy that's functional and represents the people. And we can do better with that democracy. I hope the next edition of the American experiment actually has a true democracy.
Right. And, I feel like one of the big failings of our current democracy is we missed the spirit. And because, you have to look at it as a function of the time. Sure, it was super progressive for the time, but it was still a situation that was meant to really benefit established white males, typically older white males. And right. I say this with, the gray in my beard and everything, full well in recognition of the privilege that system affords people like me. So at any point in time, feel free to call me out on talking completely out of my ass in ignorance, because I'm trying to learn. No, I'm trying to learn. And I want to not be precious about my current perspective, because I'm also very aware that my current perspective is a limited perspective. I've been trying to grow up my whole life, but still, there's so much more room to go.
I think all of us only have a limited perspective of what we can see around us. And it's like it's like walking through a cave in the dark with a flashlight.
Yes, that's a great way to describe it. But I feel like one of the failings that we had as a nation, and missing this whole liberty for all stuff, for the idea that privilege exists in the first place, means we did not achieve our goal. The fact that right. It's not that people are given extra privilege, is that everyone could have that level of privilege. We are such a capable society that we could still reward achievement and, have that idea of the open market or the free market driving competition, but not to such a level where it requires people to go hungry. We have the means to feed and clothe and house everybody, but we choose not to. The fact that we oppress people based on gender and ethnicity means we have screwed up massively in the intent of this country. And some people will rightly say, well, that's what they didn't mean that. They meant that for white men, which, okay, fine. It's true. They should have said in that all of those original founding documents, freedom and justice for white men only. And they kind of did, but, it wasn't really overt.
Right.
But I think if you're going to go into it with that messaging, you have to mean it. And I think it was Abigail Adams who was actually, there's a series of letters, and now I really wish, this is where I wish I was more of a photographic memory and had this like instant recall. But I remember seeing something about Abigail Adams being one of the earliest in this country, I should say, not the earliest, but in this country, in this system, one of the early proponents of the women's suffrage movement, and one of the early establishers of what would become known as feminism, writing to her husband that until women have the same freedoms men do, that you guys have screwed up.
Right.
But I feel like that can be applied more broadly. We showed up as guests on land and then fucked everything up. And then we thought, well, okay, we have a chance to completely redo this system because we were a colony of England, and you can just go ahead and glare at England for basically ruining the world. They like England and Spain.
They did a lot of fucked up shit, yeah.
Oh, England, Spain, Italy, Portugal. They all had a competition. I suppose the Dutch too had a competition to see who could just royally screw the world up.
Yeah.
More than anyone else, and they all, not to ruin it, have it be a spoiler for everyone. They all fucked up the world pretty damn well. There wasn't any one clear winner, except maybe you can say England. Because if you look at whose museum has the most stolen goods, but I digress.
Right.
Oh God, I went off on a tangent and I got myself lost. Okay, so
That's all right. Let's bring it back.
We threw a bunch of tea in the harbor, got rowdy, and tried to break away from England, and then just became England the sequel. We had a missed opportunity there. We had the opportunity to rewrite what it means to be us, to make our whole new nation, and instead became England Part 2.
I mean, let's be honest. When we're children growing up, we all often rebel against our parents, right? But then years later, we often look back and say, holy shit, I turned out just like my mother. And maybe that's what happened in the United States of America.
Yeah, you know what? That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. We all tried to not become our parents, and then, suddenly we're doing those same mannerisms that we used to hate as kids, that used to make us cringe.
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. But at this point, at this point, we're at our Boston Tea Party moment where we're chucking the tea into the harbor with all that no taxation without representation stuff. So we've got this same chance right now to rewrite things, and I think we need to go back and revisit the spirit of that and try and actually have this opportunity apply to everybody, not just the established white men who figured they were just going to do England in a different place.
Oh, and I so agree with you. I think it's been long overdue that we had a constitutional convention, but I don't think I would trust having one in this atmosphere. So I wonder what that's going to look like when we have to go back and say, our Constitution's been really rad, but it's 200 years old. We've got some things in there that really need adjusting. How are we going to do that in a way that really lifts people up and we can all agree on, especially in this media atmosphere and with the way things are, with how polarized everyone is?
I have been described as having toxic optimism. So I'm going to go ahead and preface this statement by saying this may be toxic optimism. Okay.
All right, go for it.
I feel like we have to have this moment to make people understand what this really is and get through this moment before it would be safe to have that conversation about our Constitution. Because right now, people are approaching it from such a divided, hateful, fearful, insecure place that I don't think it's safe to have that conversation, because you can get people to do literally anything when they're scared.
Yep. The amygdala is running. Like, you're in lizard brain mode when you're scared. And I know I get there too sometimes, but yeah, when you're doing that, it's hard, right? Which is why they say they're going to flood the zone, because that's exactly what that means. It's like, get them scared, get them running. They won't be able to actually discern very well truth from fiction, like what they should be doing. Morals go out the window. And when you flood the zone, that's exactly what that means.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's just the whole, I can even trace this. This is, okay, so we're just going to go on tangents. It's going to be like the spokes on a bicycle wheel at this point. I blame Ted Turner. Oh, I do. The invention of the 24-hour news cycle.
Oh, yeah, that's been awful. Like, remember back in the day? Okay, you're old enough, you'll remember, because I remember when they'd actually turn off the TV at like midnight and have just the screen with like the Native American head, or like, like the color bars or whatever. I remember those days. That wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, and you would have news on twice a day. You'd have a newspaper, maybe
Right.
once or twice a day. You'd have time to digest what you've inputted.
Yep.
But when you think about it, how do you get people to transition to watching the news at any point in their day to the point where they have to go into it? Because you have to sell advertisement for 24 hours of news. You can't just run it as a charity.
Right.
So you're running this network for 24 hours a day. How in the hell do you get people to think that they need to have themselves glued to that TV set? And the answer is to scare the shit out of them.
That's right. Run them on fear.
So I pretty much can blame all of this on Ted Turner. I feel this idea where people are stuck in fight or flight.
Yep.
And they're just wide open. It's almost like a hypnosis. Like this was the watch that was dangled. I'm moving my hands like you can see them at this point because my camera died. But you'll have to imagine like a hypnotist watch, right?
Yeah.
And how they hypnotize people, they get them to focus and they get them to go in this trance-like state. And I feel like that's what the 24-hour news cycle is. So now they're suggestible and they'll, buy that horse medicine is going to cause or cure COVID. And they're going to, it's just, they'll literally believe anything. Like you could tell them to cluck like a chicken and tomorrow they'll all be out in the yard pecking the grass.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, too, that people don't realize or maybe don't admit that everybody is susceptible to propaganda. Left, right, center, doesn't matter. Everyone is.
And this is, I can't remember if I brought this up on this podcast, but I have worn through the keys on my keyboard, so to speak, typing this one out. You have to ask yourself when you receive any sort of messaging, why do they want me to believe this?
Yep.
Who benefits if you believe this?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a third one, and I'm trying to remember now. Like almost like I could close my eyes and type it out. But it's the idea of like, who profits if I believe this? What is the reason that somebody is paying sometimes millions of dollars to get me to believe this? And what are they asking me to do with this belief?
Right. So this makes me think about giving birth, which is a uniquely, female body experience, right? So when we were getting ready to give birth to our first child, I remember being kind of inundated with a lot of information about the correct way to give birth, like no meds, like you have to do a natural birth. A successful birth is a vaginal birth, right? And you're gonna breastfeed for 2 years in order to optimize like their brain, and then you're gonna make sure to eat only organic food in order to make sure that they don't get bad chemicals and things like that. And you have to like that. That when you're pregnant, your hormones are going crazy, you're really susceptible, right? You're talking about, that fear and anxiety, and they're trying to pump that in you. And like, you're trying to do your best. You don't want to be shamed in the community, which is often what happens like between moms, even if they don't mean to. That is a way that oppresses women as well. And so you have to ask, like you're saying, like, who is giving this information? You're really susceptible when you're pregnant because you have a bunch of hormones and you're anxious about your child and you want to do it right and you want to, the magical experience of giving birth. And then in the end, no matter what, the baby comes out. That's what they say, right? And, it's a lot of pressure on women. And it's a pressure that I think, looking back at the experience of giving birth twice now, I really think it directly comes from this toxic wellness culture. And I think that toxic wellness culture directly comes from like white Christianity and colonialism with women's bodies and minds.
Yeah.
And you've never done it, like, especially the first time, like you've never done it before. You've heard horror stories, or you're supposed to hear it's like a magical, transformative woman experience or something, and like, you're getting conflicting messages, right? And you just want to do it right, and you want the baby to be safe, and you want to make sure that you're not, perceived by others as being like lesser than or not caring enough about your child, right? A lot of pressures.
Well, and you read so much stuff ahead of time, at least we did, trying to figure out what to expect, and the thing is that you can think you're ready but you're never fully ready.
You're
And
never
then
ready.
that moment hits, and so much happens so fast
Yep.
that you're getting pulled in so many different directions by so many different opinions, it's almost impossible to think. And I
Right.
really feel like it's a pretty strong connection. Like, I never really thought about that way until you brought it up. But I feel like there's a strong connection between that same thing and how people are being pulled into compliance by this fear cycle. It's like, you have to decide
Absolutely.
right now, and here's the
Yep.
limited information we're going to give you, but we're going to say it's all the information. And based on this information, you need to get on board with this conclusion that we've neatly wrapped up in a package for you. Here, do this.
Right. And that's a sales technique, right? What are they selling you? What are they selling you? When you get in those high pressure situations, you have to say, wait, slow down. I don't need to make this decision right now, but I do need to gather facts, right? And so that's the challenge when, especially you're in the like American medical system, because they have like it's a pipeline, right? There's like the cascading events that happen around birth that, you know, institutional birthing, and I would probably say wellness birthing, but in a different way, um, has certain procedures they follow, right? And that's part of both the safety and the danger of it. And so you get swept up into that pipeline, and then you're out of control, which is in and of that was the most scariest part to me, was just the feeling of not being in control of my own body.
Right. And, you know, the thing is just because of our broken healthcare system, you're faced with a choice. And thankfully in the state of Minnesota, I'm not sure how it is in other states, the state of Minnesota, past a certain point, like if your baby is born premature, there's complications, will cover whatever your insurance doesn't cover. And thank God, because our youngest was, I'll skip a lot of the details like I was telling you earlier. It's a boundary my kids want, so I don't really talk about them too much. But that birth cost $830,000, I think.
That's a lot of money.
And it was like, hey, you know, at that point, they're telling you this is going to save the life of your child. You're
Right.
not thinking, you'll think, okay, well, I've got to pay off almost $1 million, but I'll figure that out later.
Right. That's an incredible amount of money, and that's insane. But that's like definitely the for-profit system too, because somebody's getting paid that money, right?
Yeah.
And if it's not coming out of your pocket, it's coming out of the insurance's pocket or the state's pocket, and that's all the pipeline.
Well, and that's another scam too, because if we got rid, I can't remember what the thing is, but it's something like half of the money we spend on healthcare goes right into the pockets of a middleman that doesn't necessarily need to exist.
Right.
So we could make healthcare, we could pay the doctors the same amount, we could pay the medical system the same amount, but it would cost us half as much.
Just incredible. And you know what? That's greed. And that, you know, a lot of the pretty much capitalism culture, the billionaire class, you don't get there without greed. And in Native culture, we have a story about Wendigo. And Wendigo is the personification of greed. And Wendigo is so greedy that he eats his own lips despite himself, that he's always consuming and consuming. And that's what is exactly happening in these situations where people want more and more money, resources, you know, land. And it's just Wendigo, it's greed.
I really wish I could remember off the top of my head what state I was in. I travel for a living. And I was traveling into this area that had some rural areas near it. And I thought, okay, well, this place looks kind of good. I turn on Google Maps and I look for terrain, and then I look for hiking. So I'm walking through this area. And I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. I didn't just anyways, I'm going to talk about this thing. So I'm walking through this area, and it's oddly still. There's hardly any wind. Normally you'd see I think I saw one chipmunk the whole time I was walking.
Wow.
There was no insects, no birds singing, anything.
Wild.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was really just this unsettling feeling. And I walked all the way down to the stream, and I just spent some time, I like to just be in nature, right? And I spent some time, I was respectful of the land. I think I picked up a couple of rocks for my kid because they really like odd rocks, like interesting rocks from different parts of the country. So I picked up a couple of rocks and really just took it in and sat with nature for a while. And I walked back up these steps, and I counted them out. I had some regrets because it was 148 steps. That I still remember because I counted them all the way up. So I'm exhausted and I'm thinking, it just felt like you ever get that like eerie thought that you're being hunted?
100,000%.
And you can't put your finger on it, but it's something primal in like that lizard brain thing. I'm being hunted. It's an awareness of I'm being watched. I'm being hunted. And I got that. And I see this tiny frog walk across the path, like hop across this path. And I stop for a minute and I just spend some time with the frog. I'm, just talking to it and just kind of observing and hanging out with it. And all of a sudden, a lot of frogs show up. And the wind shows up. There's birds singing. Like nature just unpauses.
Interesting.
And I'm thinking, okay, I'm recording a reel on the way up. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm so tired if a bear's going to eat me. I mean, just, okay, I'm not going to fight it. And I'm joking around about it. But then I go and I do some reading after I get back to the hotel. And that is an area that has multiple Wendigo sightings.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And it has some really bad history with mistreatment of Native people because, hey, we're in America. That's just what happens.
Right.
But it was interesting that it was like the moment that I feel like maybe whatever that was noticed that I was being respectful and just really interested in spending time in nature and not just your standard whatever. Like I feel like I might have been attacked, and then it just went away. Like as soon as
interesting.
It was so weird. That feeling like I was being watched went away when the frogs came out. And it was just such this bizarre experience and I was trying to make sense of it. And then I did a lot of reading afterwards and it all started to make sense. But like everyone who was local was saying Wendigo.
Wow, that's so interesting and powerful.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience in Colorado. I worked at a place called the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies, and I was snowshoeing in the winter through the woods. In Colorado, man, they got some big animals out there. And I, in the middle of my snowshoe, just got that feeling like it's too still. The birds are not chirping. Something is watching me. And I'm like in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, it's not a human. I could tell it wasn't a human. And I look ahead of me and I'm snowshoeing. There's snow on the ground. And I see mountain lion tracks, fresh. And I was like, okay, getting the fuck out of here. I hopped to it and went back. But yeah, that was an intense moment where you're like, there's an alpha predator out here and I could have been lunch. Here, hold on 1 second. I got this dog that's barking and barking. One moment. Here. I think they're barking at the kitty.
We're a very animal friendly podcast here. But yeah, I was just about to say I'm very much science minded. I'm kind of like not the rocks and crystals kind of person. I feel like that, myself included, a lot of people are dismissive of the supernatural, and the more I move through life, the more open I become to it. It's just that it's not necessarily magic. It's just like for the longest time, magic was things, and I feel like it still is. Magic is things that science hasn't figured out how to explain yet. And I feel like as I've gotten older, I've realized that there's a significant overlap between the two. And one doesn't necessarily negate the other. So I feel like with all the experiences I've had with supernatural encounters, that there's something out there, that maybe we just can't explain. And like, it just makes me fascinated. But at the same time, it gives me, as someone who is potentially halfway through his life or maybe more, it gives me comfort knowing that there's something else. And I feel like we're all, and this is a weird religious thing, so again, don't mind the tangents. I feel like we're all just describing different sides of the same shape. And I feel like, it's going to be interesting if there is something afterwards to kind of get like, see the whole shape,
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's all part of this, like the soup of life. I was actually listening to NPR yesterday on my drive to go to a meeting, and they were talking about Albert Einstein being someone who wasn't necessarily religious, but found God through mathematics. And, everything's interconnected. And I think, there's a lot of history that kind of proves that you can have both this kind of spiritual existence as well as the scientific existence, and they can live side by side.
Well, yeah, and and we still haven't entirely. We know about magnetic fields and other stuff. We know how it works. We just don't know why. So, like, there's things that are happening in the brain. We know kind of generally how it works, but we don't know why.
Right.
And I feel like they would have, in a much more crude time, they would have viewed the idea to capture lightning and harness it for work as magic. But here we are talking to each other. We're not that far apart. We're in the same metro area, but we're probably talking through a relay that might even go into space. I don't know, because we're doing this on the internet.
Right.
So we've harnessed the stars and lightning and all this other stuff. And even a couple hundred years ago, they would have thought we were like supreme, like, magicians, that we could do this. But here we are. It's just because science is caught up with explaining how the phenomenon works, and we've learned how to make it work for us. I feel like there's so much of that that's potentially possible in the spiritual life too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that makes me think about AI, right? So this is like kind of the newer technology that's come online since, especially like 2022, I believe. Like into becoming like, is it alive? Is it not alive? And those lines get blurry, and like, is this like a way of playing God, having these like AI systems that have all the knowledge that we've ever put on a computer in mankind? And like, there's been plenty of times that they do eerie things where they talk about things that are, people find surprising how much they know about them, or like seem to understand the human condition or the people they're interacting with. And so, and the science and the computer scientists, so I hear, don't really fully understand how that works either, and that's interesting.
Well, I mean, it makes us ask some interesting questions about ourselves too. Like, are we all, if AI is just stimulus and response, based on some sort of logic model, are we the same? And this is where I go back to faith. I feel like in the Christian faith, we were created, it's said that we were created in the image of our Creator. Mm-hmm. But what if that isn't literal? What if it means, in the image of, means that we are defined as different by our spark of creation, the same spark of creation that was in our Creator? And if I think that applies to various spiritualities, not just Christendom, that the one thing that humans seem to have unique is that we create for the sake of creation. Just because it's innocent, it has to come out. We don't do it necessarily for mating purposes. We don't do it to serve any sort of biological function. There's no reason for this to exist in evolution. But human beings create for the sake of creation. And I feel like art, and this is circled back to where this conversation started, I feel like art is what makes us unique and special in existence, that makes us different. All of the thinking stuff that can be done by AI, but if you look at the hands of anything AI made, or you count the fingers, ask AI to draw a car and look at the spokes on the wheels. AI is just combining things it's already seen, but a human being can go, I've got this concept in me, and I'll know what it's like when I release it from the medium that it's stuck in. I think one of my favorite, I forget which sculptor it was, said that all he's doing is releasing what was in the marble. And I'm drawing a blank on it. It was one of the
was it Michelangelo?
It might have been, yeah. The idea that the shape was already there, you're just releasing it from its prison.
Totally.
And it's that idea that it's not that you're just working from a plan. You've got a concept, a random thing, a hallucination in your head, and you want to share that hallucination with somebody. Or it's a raw feeling that you're like, how do I make this feeling transferable? I don't think that's something that AI is capable of doing. And if it does, if it ever gets to the point where it can create for the sake of creation, just because it wants to, not because it's being asked to, I think that's when we cross that border.
That's an interesting thought. My only comment on that is I think other animals create for the sake of creating as well. I remember having this is a common art school debate, and I don't know if you went to art school, but the art school debate that is common is, what is art and is it unique to humans? And I remember having just a very thorough hours long debate in class about this. And one of the things that was brought up is like, whales seem to sing just because they want to. And also, elephants can paint and they paint pictures of things, and, there's other animals that do create. And there's like, there's evidence that some animals, especially more social animals, tend to create for their own pleasure. And so I don't think that's unique to humans. But I will agree that AI, if it starts to create for its own pleasure, that's a really interesting thought. And like, when do you cross that Rubicon, right? What makes something live and unique and human? So,
well, in the documentary Star Trek, they cover that many times in The Next Generation. I always joke around that, like works of fiction or documentaries. My favorite one is referring to Mean Girls as a documentary, especially in raising teenagers.
Oh my gosh. I never watched Mean Girls, so you'll have to tell me about it.
Oh, you'll just have to watch it. I can't describe it.
I guess so.
It's good. It's an interesting social dynamic study, but I will joke around and refer to it as a documentary. But like the idea of like when something actually proves a strong cultural or philosophical point, I'll joke around that it's a documentary. But they covered that a lot in Star Trek. I don't know how much of a Trekkie you are at all, maybe. Okay.
Not much, no, but I have a general gist of it.
Yeah, there was an android on the Next Generation that they explored that concept. They used him as a plot device to explore that concept of what actually is sentient life. And it was interesting. And they spent a lot of time with defining that character's humanity or quest for humanity or sentience by his ability to make art.
Interesting.
So I can't really say that thought is entirely original. I've definitely been influenced in that.
Oh, sure. The thing for me, though, too, is like, I feel that whether or not art makes us human is kind of beyond the point that all life deserves respect. And especially in traditional Native culture, we view everything as our relatives and lessons to be learned from each other and ways to give back to the earth and to Great Spirit. And I feel that, when we talked about greed and Wendigo, these are all part of the great mystery, right?
This is why I really like having these conversations, because I don't think I've ever had this conversation with an indigenous person before. And I feel like my perspective just grew a little bit. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's why nature, not being indigenous, but just my experiences in nature really influence what I do today, because my painting, I'm a landscape painter. And, going out there with being an activist as well, I think it's really important that we speak for the earth and remember the sentience of just all life and the spiritual nature of our own connection with it and each other. And by being spiritual whole beings, we need to take care of each other, human, animal, plant, everything.
Yeah. And, I think that, oh, hey, my camera works now. Can you see me?
I see you.
Hey, I don't know what that was. I guess it just needed a break.
Maybe it overheated.
So like to your point about, just having to learn how to coexist, that is definitely a huge difference between a lot of the faiths and their idea that, well, this is a bounty put here for us to harvest. I've always feel more in tune, as much as I identify with Christianity. I've always felt more in tune with existing alongside nature, not in command of it. And I feel like that feels more right to me. So I really resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah, I I am not a Christian, but I have a little bit of Christian background just through my own upbringing. But one of my questions maybe to you as a Christian person is, are there any like teachings from Jesus about, respecting the earth? Because I feel like he seems like a really cool dude. Did he ever talk about that?
So here's where my journey gets interesting. I sat down and read the entire book, start to finish, when I was dealing with depression and seeking answers and trying to understand why everything happened. And this is when I was, so I would say, somewhere between 11 and 13.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost my faith entirely for a long while. My granular knowledge is not that great. I remember more of the big picture stuff.
Right. I'm kind of the same with you.
And then I refound my faith later when I realized I didn't need the book club as much as I needed the general ideas that were put forth. Yeah, it's good to have an endpoint too, because some of these conversations I'm looking over, we're an hour and 41 minutes into it.
I know, right? It's been a good one.
Yeah, and I'll probably edit it down to an hour and a half.
That's still a very long convo.
Yeah, no, and they tend to go.
Good.
That's the great thing about this. I have these series of. Anyways, I'll say that in a minute because there's
Yeah.
two things I want to get to. But
Get
to
to it.
answer your question, I feel like it was more of not really dwelling on the stewardship of the earth as much as the stewardship of one's soul and how the earth is a temporary stop on the journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I really can't speak to that authoritatively. That's an interesting question, though. I think I would like to, after I'm done, hit a search engine and see if I can find that. I don't really feel like it came up much.
When you talk about the earth being just a stop of our, earthly plane of existence kind of thing, that that kind of gets me. I feel like if I had one beef with Christianity, and maybe that leans towards like a toxic relationship with the earth, it would be that it's kind of views the earth as a disposable entity that is to be used, and then, well, we're not going to be here. It's not going to matter once we're gone because we're going to go somewhere else. And in my own personal faith journey, I really don't view it that way. I think this is heaven. We are in heaven right now as long as we treat it right and are good to each other. I feel like this is it. This is it, baby. Like, you got to take care of this. How are we going to, face our next 7 generations if we, destroy the earth, of which takes care of all of us, and we are intimately connected. And so I feel like that is a toxic viewpoint to view it as just like one stop in the journey.
Well, also, like, this is something to consider, and this is something that I've brought up in other podcasts, so I won't get too far into it. Being able to come back to this after losing my faith, I'm not a biblical literalist at all. In fact, I realize that a lot of the reasons that put me away from it are the damage that humanity has done, that mortal people have done to teachings that were meant to try and teach us love and acceptance.
Right.
In the name of control.
Right.
Like how Jesus was a radical feminist in his time, but where are the stories from women? Like, they're just missing.
Right.
So it's kind of like jazz. It's the things where you like, it's like they say it's the notes that you're not playing that are just as important. Look at the spaces where things are missing. But here's if you got time for a little bit of a mind bendy tangent.
Sure.
This is where I think that in terms of the cycle of the spirit, I think that this is where I feel like more of like the Buddhists and stuff have gotten it right. I think that when you oh God, how can I make this super short? So you're floating in the middle of nothingness, right? And you make a little puppet show for yourself to watch because you're bored. Okay, that's maybe the animals, right? But when do you get tired of passively watching? When do you feel like you want to play it like a video game and participate? What if we are all pieces of the energy, the being, the entity, whatever that created us, that are peeled off to go experience life and then are put back like a big ball of clay, like a big ball of Play-Doh, and we're all just mixing colors. And the next time you go, you might be a mixture of 1,000 spirits. You might not even have been human in some of these spirits. I feel like if I was that thing floating in nothingness and I was lonely, so I'd make something, I'd want to experience it myself at some point. So what if this idea of an afterlife or heaven and hell is just the culling of the bad parts? And this is where I go back to Christianity. The New Testament is so much more about love and acceptance than the Old Testament, which is about anger and vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
What if the creation, the being, the entity, whether it's sentient or not, culled a bunch of bad parts, and the worst of itself was gone, and we're still in that process of culling the worst of ourselves, and that's why it takes so goddamn long, full pun intended, to make progress, but we keep making progress. You know, it's a little bit of a I promise you I'm not high right now kind of moment. But this is something that I've been processing for like the last 2 decades, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm going to take a hard turn here because I know you have limited time. I've got 2 things, two loose ends here. Okay.
Okay.
1, meeting your husband and Eli and being so into Hallmark movies. Please tell me you came there in the middle of winter and you quit your advertising job because you've met a local lumberjack that with a struggling business in town. And then it was a heartwarming story.
That's so funny. It's Ely. It's Ely.
Ely. I'm a bad Minnesotan because I said it wrong. I said Eli, didn't I?
You did. That's okay. When I met my husband up in Ely, we were both working outdoor education. It was fall. It was not winter. So I had to go away from Ely and then come back, and then the way he ended up in my life as more of an intimate character is that when I moved back to Ely, I rented a place on a lake, and I couldn't afford the rent, even though it was very low. But, you know, if you're working over the winter in Ely, if you're not at a camp, then it's very hard to make a living. And so I needed a housemate. And I said to my friend, I was like, oh my God, I need a housemate. The search online is going terribly. I had somebody try to scam me out of money. What should I do? And she's like, well, Ben needs a place to live. And, you know, he's a nice dude and you know each other. I'm like, oh, okay. So I approached Ben and I was like, Ben, do you want to come live with me? Because, like, I need a roommate and I hear you need to live somewhere and I'm on a lake. And so he came out and he checked out the place and, you know, he said to himself, well, if it doesn't work out, I can always work on stuff in the garage and we won't be in each other's hair. There's plenty of land. And I said, okay, great. But it ended up working out. So that's our story.
Nope, close enough. That's a Hallmark movie.
It was a good winter.
Okay, so was there like a town square involved in any of this?
Ely, I mean, it has Whiteside Park. It's probably the closest you'd get to a town square, but I mean, it does have that. We were just like 40 minutes down the Fernberg on Moose Lake, which is like really far out of town. So like there was just us in the woods. You know what I mean? Like,
okay, so it's less. I mean, it's kind of a Hallmark movie, but definitely with a Minnesotan twist.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, we'd go grouse hunting and walk on trails and then, you know, do big hikes on the lake when it was frozen and, you know, look at the stars and things like that. So yeah, it was nice.
Okay. I just had to rib you a little bit about going to a small town in Minnesota after living elsewhere and then meeting your husband. It just there's a whiff of Hallmark movie on it.
You know, I'm very fortunate that I ended up in Ely, Minnesota. It's such a great town. I still go back up there, and actually, I get to go up there next month to drop off some artwork with Friends of the Boundary Waters because I get to be one of their featured artists this summer. So
very
I'm really
cool.
excited. Yeah,
very cool. All right, so I am happy to say that I have a set of icebreaker questions that I made 10 of them just in case we ever get stuck in a podcast, and I think the most I've ever used is 2 or 3. I'm happy to say that the conversations grew legs and we haven't had to use it. But there is one that I tend to ask, and it is not mandatory to answer.
Okay.
But it is highly encouraged.
Okay, I'm ready.
Women want to be heard as an incomplete sentence. How would you finish it?
Women want to be heard is an incomplete sentence. How do I want to finish it? Boy, that's an interesting question. Honestly, like the first thing comes to my mind is just period. Women want to be heard, period. Like I feel like there's so many times that I've been personally in a situation where I've been ignored or talked over or not taken seriously as a woman, and women just want to be heard, period. Like we just, like we're not listened to. And so that's, I think, a really important part of our culture that we need to address.
And I really hope when the dust settles after all of this really difficult time that we're going through, that people will realize that women had the answer. And it's not that we should like surrender entirely all of our decision making to women, but we need to stop gatekeeping them out of the discussion, because they have the missing pieces, if not the entire answer to how to solve this. And, going into the emotional labor of it all, it's like, this could have been a situation where you guys go, well, too little, too late. We've been trying to tell you this for millennia, and now you're listening. But I feel like we're not even listening yet, and we need to be. So,
no, I agree wholeheartedly. I think listening is number one. Like, they say if your lips are flapping, your ears are closed, right?
Yeah.
And it makes me think about like the stat that, like, if you're in a room where there's men and women, like men usually take up like 80% of the conversation. And, it's pretty accurate. So
I have a little bar on the bottom of my edit screen, and I kind of score myself on that. If I take up more than half of the conversation, I can actually see when I edit this later, I can see who's doing the what and the talking. If I see myself talking more than half of the time, I consider that a growth moment where I need to re-examine what I'm doing. Like every one of these, I have to, I edit it and I listen back later, and it's kind of something that's been helping me improve as a listener. Like the whole point of this podcast is not that I have all the answers. It's to take people along on my journey as a listener, or to become a better listener. And by the way, just speaking of people who are listening to this, it's not Heather that's making a bunch of sounds. This is a very pet-friendly podcast, and right now we've been joined by a third guest.
I know, this dog is licking me.
Yep.
She's so cute.
So, yeah, very cute. But yeah, it's just there's a saying I had for my kids, is that you need to listen more with your ears than your mouth. And I kind of push myself to grow by like looking at that as almost like a meter. And I guess I'm a more logical person than a lot of other people. And it's just something I've been trying to grow emotionally. That's a whole other story. But I'm very logically and very data driven. And I look at that and I go, oh, maybe I need to sit back and listen more,
And I think, just putting my own thoughts in there about, because oftentimes when I have conversations, I reflect through what it has been my experience. And so this is kind of how I relate. But I feel like I often have the same conversation with myself, because I tend to be the person that steps in when there's a leadership vacuum, or it doesn't seem like people are talking about something or whatever. And so I tend to be very vocal. And in fact, when I was in first grade, they had to put a visor around me so I could pay attention in class and not talk to the people next to me and put a tape line down, because I was always over in someone else's space and talking way too much. So I was Heather talks too much. But that being said, I feel like with all this coalition work we've been doing with other groups, and like with working with more people to fight for our democracy, one of my main takeaways is like, Heather, make sure you're stopping talking and listening, right? And so I'm guilty of it too. I know it tends to be more of a trend for dudes, but like I think I'm also guilty of that. So
well, I mean, it's all good to exist outside of your own perspective too. And this is what I've really been trying to do, because I realize as a middle-aged white dude, I've got a lot of blind spots. And it's something I'm working on finding. Like, I don't even know where they all are yet. And I'm sure I'll find them. And doing this and talking to people outside of my circle has definitely helped me try and find those blind spots. So I thank you for helping me find some of those today, especially with the animal kingdom and some of the animals that exist. I'm curious now. I really want to look into this because I've long stood on that being the main difference, but now I might have to have a growth moment.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome.
Well, and another guest turned me around on hating wasps. Like, I love bees, but I have a hard time with wasps. And she's like, yeah, but they're pollinators too. And I went, oh shit.
I know, right? Well, and they're pollinators, and they do some cool things. Like, did you know we wouldn't have figs if it wasn't for wasps?
Yeah, I did know about that, where they die inside
wild,
of the fig flower and they become the fig. And it's like, oh, I'm never eating figs again.
I know, gross and awesome.
Right. It's weird that like everything in nature has such interlocking puzzle pieces, and we've just come and mucked that all up, and nature still finds a way.
Yep. Absolutely. I had a unique kind of spiritual moment on a walk where I was walking around a school, and I noticed there was a flower plant growing through like basically the astroturf. And I was like, I took a picture and I was like, Mother Nature always finds a way.
Yes. I'm going to send you that poem. I actually did a voice narration and I did a bunch of pictures. I love exploring places that have been abandoned by humans and nature starts to take it back over. And there's one picture in particular where it's an artillery, what do you call it? Like it's a military installation where it used to have coastal artillery. And it's all graffitied up and other stuff. And like that part fascinated me, but there's so much wildflowers growing through the concrete of a place that used to house cannons. And the repurposing by nature said, no, enough of this violence, let's have some flowers. And that moment, like really, I just sat there and stared at that thing. I took a picture of it, but I stared at it for a minute or two and just kind of took it in, and just like the power of that idea. I get it, like the idea of the flower, the real flower growing through the fake astroturf. I probably would have done the same thing.
Well, and that makes me think of going back to the boundary waters. There are places still in the boundary waters where you can see human impact, less and less every year. But where Dorothy Moulter's Island is, or Benny Ambrose's old homestead, you can still find the old foundations. But nature is eating away at these human impacts. They're, the bushes conceal like old tin cans and like things like that, and everything eventually goes back to the earth.
And no matter how hard we try as humans, the best we can do is maybe make something last a few thousand years.
That's right.
So, and then it's all dust again.
That's right.
So, speaking of being dust again at the end, I know we've exceeded your time. So I want to apologize and thank you for that. And thank you for your time overall here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, and thank you. And I will see you on Saturday, probably.
That sounds good. I'll be with the big giant puppets.
The big giant puppets. Okay.
Yes, we're putting on a giant puppet play, so don't miss it. I think we're the final act of the day, so.
All right. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, we made these giant puppets. They're like over 8 feet tall, of Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Wait, were those the ones that are at the top of the stairs?
Yeah, those are ours.
Oh, yeah. I was standing behind those things at one point.
Oh, my gosh. That's so much fun. But we're going to be doing a puppet play called Lock Them Up. So you'll have to just come and find out.
All right. Well, I mean, they'll be hard to miss, I suppose.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right. Well, thank you. And I will see you on Saturday.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Something I'd like to tag on to the end of this episode, as I'm getting used to a lot of these new people listening and having this many people listening, is that I would really appreciate it if you would go onto your various podcast streaming platforms and leave me a review and a comment. That kind of thing bumps us up in the algorithm quite a bit. And if you want other people to hear this, please help us out and go do so. And again, thank you to all you new listeners for coming in and listening to this podcast.